Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer McGuffin. I am the Chief Communications Officer at the law firm of Romanucci and Blandin. Thank you for joining us today at this press conference announcing the filing of civil litigation in relation to the Old National Bank mass shooting last April. We will start with attorney comments, followed by some statements from some of our plaintiffs, and then take questions which will be responded to only by the legal team. Let me tell you who you will hear from. From Thomas Law here in Louisville, Tad Thomas, Kevin Weiss. From Everytown Law, Alla Lefkowitz, Emily Walsh. Andrew Nellis is also an important member of the team. From Romanucci and Blandin, Antonio Romanucci, David Nyman, Sarah Raish. Please let me also acknowledge Bianca Yambis in the room from Thomas Law, Katie Wertheimer from Everytown Law. We will start with Tad Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, survivors and loved ones of those killed on April 10, 2023, in the mass shooting at the Old National Bank here in Louisville, Kentucky, filed a civil lawsuit against River City Firearms, the gun store that provided the weapon to the now deceased shooter. The shooter used an AR-15 style rifle purchased at River City Firearms to murder 5 of his colleagues at the bank, wounded 8 more people, including responding police officers, and traumatizing many others who were present. The lawsuit alleges this act of widespread devastation and loss of life was made possible because River City Firearms ignored obvious warning signs when the shooter entered the store to purchase an assault weapon while he was in the midst of a mental breakdown just 1 week before the shooting. Further, River City upsold him, choosing profits over safety by selling him additional tactical equipment, including 3 additional 30-round magazines, a red dot sight, and a vertical grip for greater accuracy and control over the weapon. The plaintiffs in these cases include the families of individuals killed in the shooting, bank employees who were shot and wounded, and people at the bank who were traumatized by the shooting, including the family of James Tutt, who was shot and killed, and his wife Karen Tutt, the family of Joshua Barrick, who was shot and killed, including his wife Jessica Barrick, and their 2 children, Julie Anderson, who was shot in the arm, Jimmy Evans, who was shot in the calf, Dana Mitchell, who was shot in the back, Stephanie Dallas Schwartz, who was shot in the leg. You may notice that a number of those people are not here today. The reason for that is it's simply too painful for them and they need more time. Crowds are difficult. Being around people who were there is difficult. Hearing the story retold is difficult. Perhaps they'll never be ready. It's an honor to represent these families with some of the finest lawyers in the country who have deep experience in these cases. I'd like to acknowledge the attorneys from Romanucci and Blandin, my friend and founding partner Antonio Romanucci, who could not be here today, his partner David Nyman, and senior attorney Sarah Raish. From Everytown Law, Alla Lefkowitz, senior director of affirmative litigation, Andrew Nellis, counsel, and Emily Walsh, litigation fellow. And of course, my partner at Thomas Law Offices, Kevin Weiss. We're also pleased to stand shoulder to shoulder with my good friend and trial attorney here in Louisville, Kentucky, Hans Poppy of the Poppy Law Firm. Mr. Poppy represents the families of Tommy Elliott and Juliana Farmer. You'll hear from Mr. Poppy shortly. The causes of action in the complaint include negligent entrustment and negligence. The lawsuit was filed yesterday here in Louisville, Kentucky in Jefferson County Circuit Court. The complaint states that someone in the gun store said the shooter appeared uneasy, avoided eye contact, and demonstrated a complete lack of knowledge about guns. The shooter allegedly told River City employees that he wanted to purchase an AR-15 for self-defense. Despite the cost, a rationale particularly hard to square with his lack of firearm experience. Licensed firearm dealers, like River City, are instructed by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives that they are the first line of defense in preventing firearms from falling into the wrong hands, and that they should not proceed with suspicious sales. Additionally, they are specifically advised against selling to customers who demonstrate a lack of knowledge about firearms or behave nervously. Against the backdrop of a national epidemic of mass shootings carried out by troubled young men wielding AR-15s, River City should have realized that something was amiss. The consequences of ignoring these obvious red flags was a foreseeable event, and it resulted in the tragic shootings of that day. The devastation done to the Louisville community by this mass shooting is immeasurable, and our clients' lives are forever altered because of it. They deserve justice for the harms they have suffered, but they also feel strongly that using this litigation will bring about a positive change so that other families do not have to suffer in the same way. Our legal team is committed to fighting for the justice that these families deserve. I'd like to turn it over to Alla Lefkowitz now.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you for everyone who's here today. My name is Alla Lefkowitz. I'm the Senior Director of Affirmative Litigation at Everytown Law, which is the litigation arm of Everytown for gun safety. Through our work, my colleagues and I find ourselves in towns and cities, big and small, that have been forever changed by gun violence in their communities. Whether it's Highland Park, where a gunman opened fire during a 4th of July parade, or Uvalde, Texas, where an 18-year-old murdered 19 school children and 2 teachers, or Buffalo, New York, where another 18-year-old carried out a racist massacre at a supermarket. We work with survivors of gun violence who have lived through the unbelievable. And in the face of these unthinkable tragedies, they come together to channel their pain and their grief into progress. And they all have one thing in common. They take these legal actions because they want to prevent similar tragedies from happening to other families and to other communities. And that is exactly what this lawsuit is all about. How can we all prevent a tragedy like this that happened on Old National Bank on April 10th from happening again? It's important to note that when companies like River City Firearms decide to apply for a federal firearms license, they take on an obligation to do the utmost to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. This is a very heavy responsibility, and it is one that needs to be taken seriously. Federal firearm dealers run background checks. They do a lot of paperwork. They have to help law enforcement, and they have to evaluate each sale to determine whether a customer poses an unacceptable risk of harm, sometimes to themselves and sometimes to others. That is their job. As Tad said, the ATF explains to all licensees that they are the first line of defense to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. And the vast majority of gun stores take this responsibility very seriously. They understand that they are when they're faced with a suspicious sale or when something just doesn't feel right, they must err on the side of caution and decline the transaction. The consequences of failing to do so are just too great. But as we allege in our complaint, River City Firearms failed in its obligations that day when it sold an assault rifle and all of the deadly accessories to a complete novice who had no idea how to hold the rifle or how to load it, who's acting oddly in the store, averting his gaze, speaking in hushed tones. These are all indicators that federally licensed firearms dealers are trained to be on the lookout for. Just as pharmacists are trained to look for suspicious behavior when selling Sudafed, or doctors are trained when prescribing pain medication, their professional responsibilities require it. Our hope is that by filing this lawsuit and by holding this press conference here today, that owners or employees of gun stores who are watching take note, and the next time that a suspicious customer walks into their store, they are reminded of the devastating consequences of a negligent sale, and also of their obligations to prevent those consequences. I'd like to note that yesterday's filing is just the first step in this litigation. The great legal team that is gathered here today before you is not done. We are continuing our investigation into the marketing and distribution practices of companies further up the chain. For example, by looking into incentives that are given to gun stores to sell 4 large capacity magazines at one time. As one of my colleagues said in a separate conversation, this isn't candy. These are things that make mass shooters more deadly. And finally, I'll end by saying the most important thing, which is that it is an honor to stand with and fight for our clients here today. These are survivors who experienced the worst of circumstances, who have been forced to persevere in the wake of unimaginable loss and pain. You are our inspiration in everything that we do, and we know that this lawsuit is not going to take away your pain, but we hope that it will achieve some measure of justice for what you've gone through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ala. And good morning, everybody. My name is David Nyman. I'm a partner at Romanucci Blandin in Chicago, Illinois. Romanucci Blandin is proud to represent victims of mass shooting cases from across the country, including those from Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, the 4th of July parade shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, the Las Vegas Route 91 concert mass shooting, and the Pulse nightclub mass shooting in Orlando. And now, we're here today to talk about the victims of the Old National Bank shooting that occurred here in Louisville on April 10th, 2023. There are 2 words I'd like to share with you today, and you'll hear them throughout my brief statement this morning: predictable and preventable. The tragedy that took place at Old National Bank is infinitely more horrific because it didn't need to happen. 5 people were killed. Countless others were wounded and traumatized, all on the heels of an endemic of gun violence, making this all very predictable and very preventable. This mass shooting just was not the act of one troubled man, no. As our complaint alleges, the shooter was able to purchase an assault rifle because River City ignored obvious red flags that any reasonable employee in the store should have noticed. They were trained to notice these red flags. And in fact, a witness in the store did notice these red flags. River City Firearms was derelict in its responsibilities to those at Old National Bank by deciding the profit from one gun sale is more important than protecting their community. As a result, River City Firearms and its owners bear responsibility for the devastation at the bank that morning. And our lawsuit seeks to hold them accountable for the foreseeable damage that their actions and inactions caused. Predictable? Yes. Preventable? Very much so. And it's on all of us now, working on behalf of these clients, to hold River City Firearms accountable so this does not happen again. Victims of mass shootings never cease to amaze me, and the individual families that we're representing here today are no different. They have made the bold and brave decision to use their own personal, excruciating stories to create long-standing change that will make this city and hopefully this state a safer place. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I'd like to now introduce Hans Poppy.
Good morning. My name is Hans Poppy. I represent the families of Juliana Farmer and Tommy Elliott. Thank you for being here today. This legal action targets the retailer of the assault weapon, highlighting the urgent need for responsible measures in gun stores. The alarming rise in mass shooting demands immediate attention. In 2023, there were 656 mass shootings, resulting in 746 deaths and 2,500 injuries. It's time to address the root cause of such tragedies. Our focus is on responsible gun sales. Background checks, vetting processes, and enhanced security measures are crucial. Yet comprehensive gun control measures are essential. Closing loopholes, enforcing stricter background checks, and restricting access to assault weapons are not infringements on the Second Amendment, but safeguards for our citizens. The frequency and devastation of mass shootings in the United States far exceed those in other developed countries. Comparative data reveals a concerning truth. We need introspection. Countries with strict gun control measures have successfully curbed mass shootings. Our current approach is not effective. Let the memories of all of these families, including the Farmers and the Elliots, be a catalyst for change. The global context should guide us, whether through background checks, restrictions on assault weapons, or reconsideration of mental health policies. It's time for us to reassess our approaches. In the memories of those we have lost and those who have been injured, let us unite for a safer, more compassionate society. Our obligation to victims is not just legal, it's moral, and it is rooted in collective responsibility. Together we can forge a path towards a safer and more secure society. Thank you.
We will now hear the words of a number of our clients. Emily Walsh from Everytown will read the words of Dana Mitchell, who could not be here today.
Good morning. On April 10th of last year, my life, our lives, were changed in a way we never could have imagined. There are the obvious ways, but there are less obvious ways that most people don't think of. The sleepless nights, the fear of going into public places, the loss of joy, the loss of peace, the loss of my sense of security, safety, and control. Even going to the grocery store is stressful. The first time I went to the grocery store after that day, I remember standing in the freezer aisle thinking that if I heard something, I could hide in one of the freezers. Anytime I am in public, I am constantly looking around me, noticing people's conversations, moods, body language, and even the bags they carry. My initial relief was that I had survived. But in the days and weeks following, the guilt of being one of the survivors was paralyzing. As I lay on the floor of the conference room that morning, shot in the back and bleeding, thinking, is this really happening? Is this where it all ends? I had to witness and listen to my friends and coworkers being shot and killed by someone we all knew. Listening to the gunshots over and over, I heard one of my friends begging for someone to help them, begging not to die. Those are the words I will never get out of my head. I laid there as still as possible, holding my breath at times so that it would appear I was dead. I had no idea where the shooter was or if he would be returning to finish the job. I knew I was shot, but didn't know where the bullet had landed or if it had hit anything vital. All I could do was lie there and wait. The grief has been overwhelming some days. It is the first thing I think about when I wake up each morning, and the last thing I think about when I go to sleep each night. I know that it will get better with time, but really, no one should ever have to have those thoughts. I am a true believer in the Second Amendment. Just as it states, it is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. I also believe that our forefathers, while writing that, never believed that those arms would be developed into weapons of mass destruction in the form of what we have today with assault weapons. In the state of Kentucky, just as I think it is in all states, you cannot go into the DMV and get a driver's license simply by asking for one. You have to study and be able to pass a written test. You also have to prove that you have logged at least 60 hours of practice driving. Then you have to take a physical driving test to prove you know what you are doing and how to properly operate the vehicle. Yet, a person walked into a gun store here in Louisville back on April 4th, having clearly never owned or even shot a gun before. Then the trained, experienced salesperson at that store sold him an AR-15 style assault rifle, boxes of ammunition, and all the cool accessories to go with it. These weapons have one purpose. That is to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Yes, our lives now have a new normal, but what we would all give to have our old normal back. I am extremely grateful for life and the opportunity to make a difference, but I am forever sad and heartbroken at the loss we all suffered that day. It was all unnecessary and could have been prevented. We have to do better. We have to. Thank you.
I'm Karen Tutt, and my husband was Jim Tutt. He was violently murdered on April 10th at Old National Bank. A mentally unstable coworker easily purchased an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle from River City Firearms, saying that he was making the purchase for home defense. This is a weapon of mass destruction, a weapon specifically designed for warfare. Then within 6 days of the purchase, he violently massacred 5 coworkers, injured 6 more, 2 police officers, and terrorized many others. Jim was my amazing husband of 24 years, a father to 4, a grandfather to 2, and a friend to so many. He never met a person that he didn't like, and he was one of the kindest people you would ever meet. Jim served in his church, locally, and on mission trips. He participated on several boards to serve our community. Jim Tutt was a hard worker and a visionary banker who participated as a part of project teams that developed commercial property across the United States. My and my family's loss is catastrophic. We have a gaping hole in our family, and my husband is gone way too soon. Though I know my husband is in heaven, I now live without his companionship. He was my rock. He was supportive, encouraging, kind, and funny. He was my answer to prayer and my partner to dream, adventure, and do life with. My family and I have suffered tremendous emotional and physical loss. The trauma of that day is still fresh in our minds, and the pain remains. My goal, or purpose driven by the pain, is to take action to prevent this from ever happening to another family again. To honor my husband's memory, I will work for common sense gun control to protect our families and communities. Gun control legislation is not intended to strip Americans of their Second Amendment rights, but to provide safety guidelines and policies to protect our families and communities from situations like mine that were completely preventable. The gun industry cannot be allowed to escape the moral and social responsibility that is crucial in the commerce of a product with such weighty responsibilities, life and death. They have to be held accountable for the unconscionable business strategies for who they sell to and the practices they use to sell guns. My husband just went to work on April 10th. If it can happen to him and the countless others that have been victims of mass shootings, school children and teachers, people going to movies and concerts who have been massacred by acts of gun violence, it can happen to you or your loved ones too. This unimaginable act of domestic terrorism could have been prevented. Instead of asking how can we bring a lawsuit against a gun store for making a sale, you might ask how can we not try to prevent River City Firearms from selling the next AR-15 without the proper duty of care that could be used to kill your person and inflict pain on your family. None of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone.
To my left, your right, is a photograph of Tommy Elliott, 63, a beloved father, brother, uncle, and friend. He was a pillar of this community, He was a senior vice president at Old National Bank. Former Governor Steve Beshear named Tommy as chairman of the Kentucky Retirement Systems Board in 2011. The things he did for this community are innumerable. He served on the board of the American Heart Association. He was the mayor of the city of Norburn Estates. He served on the board of the Jefferson County League of Cities, the Goodwill Industries of Kentucky, Little Sisters of the Poor, the Kentucky Show, Kentucky Educational Television, the Commonwealth Fund for KET, and Kentucky Museum of Art and Craft in Louisville. He was the past chairman of Baptist Health Louisville. Larry Gray, president of Baptist Health, referred to Tommy as a passionate advocate and a community leader. His love for both led him to strong positions calling for accountability and grace. For Tommy's family and those closest to him, they will remember him as the person who took care of them. His love language was clearly acts of service. From the minute he woke up in the morning until the time he laid his head at rest, he was thinking about others and what he could do for them. There are many people, some in this room, whose lives were changed by Tommy in various ways. He did these acts of kindness not for thanks or recognition, but because he truly cared for people and doing what was within his power to make their lives better. His friend George Stinson said, Tommy was the son of Louisville, and he was everybody's friend. His loving wife, Mary Ann, said he was a wonderful, extraordinary husband, her best friend and partner in life, and she misses him every moment of every day. Juliana Farmer, age 45. Her family describes her as the sweetest, kindest, loving woman who everyone loved to meet. She had a smile that lit up a room, and she never met a stranger. Her leaving this earth so soon has made a huge impact on her family and the community around her. She was the core and key to everyone's heart, not just family and friends, but her community. Even to this day, the community reaches out to the family, community members that they don't even know, expressing their thoughts and prayers. And while that means so much to the family, to know that their mother made such an impact on the world, they hope we can come together to end gun violence, because thoughts and prayers is simply not enough. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We will now take some questions for the legal team, but before we do so, I would like to take a moment to thank members of the Louisiana Metro Police Department who are here today. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm in my head. Thanking them for their willingness to come and give comfort to our clients today, who understandably have deep concerns being in public places, but also thanking the Louisville police for their heroics that day. Their contribution is immeasurable. Their own members were impacted in very personal ways, and we appreciate them very much. Now, we'll open it up for questions.
I've said before, Louisville is a big, small town, and so the witness has acquaintances with the bank, and that's how we got her information. We don't want to get too much into details now, so that'll be part of the lawsuit, and there'll be additional interviews. Other questions?
The lawsuit alleges that River City failed in its duty to recognize it. What legal obligations does a gun store have
Sure.
to deny or report suspicious behavior?
I'm going to turn it over to Alla because she addressed in her comments about the federal requirements in training.
So taking a step back, every business in the United States has a legal obligation to not expose the public to an unreasonable risk of harm. That is the tort of negligence, or you could say negligent entrustment. The tort of negligent entrustment is when a dangerous product, it could be a car, for example, in this case it's a firearm, in some cases it's fireworks, is provided to an individual who is incapable of safely handling that product. And that is on the legal, on the kind of, civil negligence lawsuit, that's that obligation. Separately, and it incorporated into this, every gun company that wants to be in the business has to apply for a federal firearms license. Once they apply for that federal firearms license, they take on certain obligations. And the essence of what they do is to evaluate transactions and determine that they are legal and that they are not endangering the public. And so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosive, the ATF, along with industry trade organizations and along with a host of private consultants that do them, train them on questions that they are supposed to be asking and red flags that they are supposed to be observing in every transaction. One of the most common red flags that all of these trainings have in common is, does this customer not have any experience with this particular firearm or really understand why he or she is buying that particular firearm as opposed to another make or model? Because that could be an indicator that the person is not buying the gun for themselves, but is in fact straw purchasing the firearm or trafficking the firearm. That in many cases what I've seen is that could be an indicator, and this is what they're trained on, indicator that the person is unfortunately purchasing the firearm for the purpose, for the intent of ending their own life. And in some cases, the purpose is to commit a mass shooting such as this one. So the legal obligation that FFLs have is to ask these questions that they are provided by the ATF, by industry trade organizations, to be able to determine the appropriateness of the transaction.
And you said that the firms are exploring possible other litigation. Is the Sturgeon family a potential defendant?
I think if I don't speak for everyone necessarily, but I certainly speak for myself, this was a tragedy for their family as much as it was for all the families that are here today. So currently we have no plans to make the Sturgeon family parties. We don't know of anything that they've done wrong in this case as of today. Other questions?
Are you guys asking for River City Firearms to have their license revoked?
So you can't do that as part of our civil lawsuit. That's up to ATF and the licensing agencies. Unfortunately, the only thing we can do as part of this complaint is monetary damages. Now, in settlement, there are often other provisions that you can have a defendant agree upon, and I think everyone in this case would like to see change, would like to see some sort of reform. The whole purpose of what we're doing here is to prevent this from happening in the future.
They're still operational, correct?
They're still operational, yes. Yes. I'm sorry.
The additional steps for your litigation, are you guys thinking about going after the gun manufacturers, or just want to know what other parties you're thinking of if it's not?
I think it was mentioned earlier, we're looking up the chain, so everything, including potential accessory manufacturers and sellers, the manufacturer of the weapon. The good thing about being in litigation is it gives us additional tools to further our investigation, and so we're going to leave no stone unturned. Another question? Yeah.
Why is Deanna Eggers not involved in this lawsuit?
We don't represent her family, but I'll just say that our hearts and minds go out to her family as well today. So she's not involved just because none of us represent her family. Other questions?
Sorry, can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Are you, the families of Tommy Elliott and Juliana Farmer, are they joining this lawsuit?
We'll be filing a separate lawsuit. We are strategically timing that lawsuit. These are excellent lawyers on both sides of me today, and so we allow them to take this first step forward, but we are very much involved, and as Ted said earlier, standing shoulder to shoulder. We are coordinating and we are collaborating our efforts together.
Would that lawsuit involve the same allegations or something different?
Substantially similar.
Any other questions? If I could just say one thing in closing, you know, as the families here, like I said, want change. And if any firearms dealer out there is watching what's going on in the news today and watching this press conference, I just ask you to hear the stories of these families. You are the first line of defense, and you can prevent this next tragedy. So I hope you'll pay attention to what's going on here today and what's going on in Louisville, Kentucky, and do things in your own shops to prevent the next tragedy. Jennifer.
Thank you. If anyone has further questions, you can address them to press@everytown.org or press@rblaw.net. Thank you for being here.